This is the Kirby on Sports podcast. I am Josh Kirby. We are talking about college volleyball and volleyball in general as the Division I college volleyball championship wrapping up. Here to help us talk some volleyball is Emily Ehman. She is an analyst for Big Ten Network, ESPN, as well as Volleyball World and Fox Sports. Emily, Happy New Year. Thanks for hopping on. How are you?
Good. It's good to talk some volleyball, even though the season just ended. It was good to get some time off and feel like we're diving right back in.
Yeah, and congratulations are in order getting the new gig with Indian Ignite, the new pro volleyball team. Just tell us a little bit about that opportunity first and foremost.
Yeah, so there's two pro volleyball leagues that are starting up, and I think a lot of us, in terms of talent, we're kind of going back and forth of which one to go with. And I'd been pulled in a few different directions, actually, to kind of pull back the curtain, and then the team in Indy reached out, and I'm from Bloomington, Indiana. So to me, it was a really big deal to have a team reach out that was in my home state for the opportunity to call professional volleyball there. And I'm also doing some social media content for them as well. So I'm super excited. My first game is on January 16th. So at the time of recording this, I still have about a week or so until then, but I'm super excited. It's going to be really fun and just historic. It's the first ever professional volleyball team in Indiana. And I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, that is really cool. Congratulations again. So just going back to the beginning, Emily, sort of doing a lot of college volleyball coverage and pro volleyball, as we just mentioned. How did sort of get started for you? How do you sort of get the ball rolling and know like this is what you wanted to do in terms of covering volleyball?
Good question. It's funny because I never knew that I wanted to cover volleyball. I mean, I've been playing since I was 9 years old. And around that time, I realized I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. So I've known what I wanted to do since I was really little. My uncle is a sports broadcaster. He did college basketball for ESPN. And I used to follow him around and follow the sideline reporters around. And I just thought it was the coolest job ever. So from a pretty young age, I knew pretty much exactly what I wanted to do in terms of an industry and career path. So from then, I wanted to go to a school for volleyball where I could get a good journalism degree, where I went to Northwestern and played volleyball there. And I did a few internships throughout college, one at Big Ten Network, one in the MLS with the Chicago Fire soccer team. And then after college, I graduated during March of 2020. So it was quite literally the worst possible time to try to break into sports. Sports were canceled. Obviously, no one's hiring. And I was applying to all of these jobs that either I didn't want or, I wasn't qualified for, or simply no one was hiring those jobs in general. There was kind of a hiring freeze on most places. And I didn't really have a reel put together, which is what you need to go into broadcasting to send out to producers and all of that. So I was kind of left with nothing after college, besides my degree and some experience I had working. It was mostly social media and production. So I ended up starting a web show in May of 2020. I kind of decided that if there wasn't any opportunities available, that I was going to create one for myself. And I started a web show called Big Ten Volley Talk. And I would interview Big Ten volleyball athletes, coaches, alumni, really anyone around the sport. And from there, I kind of started gaining a following within the Big Ten volleyball space and volleyball community as a whole. And that was a fan base that I knew existed from playing in the Big Ten. I would walk into 8,000 person arenas night in and night out, and I could see that fans were really hungry for the sport and they weren't getting it on other platforms aside from TV. At that time in 2020, there was no social coverage of volleyball at all. And the term digital host and those roles didn't really exist. So I kind of created that role for myself, and I ended up pitching Big Ten Volley Talk to volleyballmag.com as a digital series, which we then, they took me up on and expanded to all of NCAA volleyball. And so from there, I started to gain more of a following, and I was working side jobs just in production to actually make money. But I started pitching my kind of volleyball work to different people. So I pitched myself to Athletes Unlimited, their first season of professional volleyball in 2021 to work as a digital host. I pitched myself to Big Ten Network to cover the NCAA tournament, which was then in the spring of 2021. And I kind of just kept the ball rolling, used all the connections that I had. And I still wanted to work in broadcasting, but more broadly. I was doing sideline reporting on football and men's basketball. And I went out to cover a men's lacrosse Final Four, all these random things that I was doing adjacently with volleyball. And I started really honing in on my craft of being a volleyball analyst. And that was something that I found that I gravitated toward a lot more than, doing sidelines for other sports that I wasn't as familiar with, or in the hosting role, which I still really like, but I really like being a volleyball analyst. And now that, there's basically year-round work, which wasn't the case 5 years ago. I can cover the college season in the fall. I can cover now professional volleyball in the winter. And then in the summer, I also cover international professional volleyball. So it's really year-round now. And so over the last, I would say 2 years, I've really started to realize that I really want to be the volleyball person. I want this to be my sole focus. I can make a living off of it. And I'm pretty good at it. And it's what I like to do. So, all that to say, come full circle, I never knew that I wanted to get into volleyball. It kind of just happened that way, by circumstance and, by also deciding now this is how I want to market myself. This is my brand and this is what I'm good at, and can make a living off of. So again, I didn't know I wanted to get into it. It kind of just happened that way. But I mean, I love it so much. Every day doesn't even feel like a job. They say when you love what you're doing for work, it doesn't feel like work. And it's completely true. I wake up every day and I'm just so grateful that I literally just get to talk about volleyball. Like how crazy is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned you played for Northwestern in volleyball too. So sort of you're playing in the Big Ten. You know what Big Ten volleyball is like. Obviously, players are changing, coaches are changing. That's with any sport, I would imagine. But you playing at Northwestern, sort of translating to being a volleyball analyst, that I would imagine that gives a lot of pros for networks in terms of what they're looking for in a volleyball analyst, you being on the court right there.
Totally. I think especially at this level, you kind of have to have played the sport in order to be a good analyst. You really have to understand the sport ins and outs. And so much of it too is just connections. Do you have connections with coaches and players? And that's something that I really work hard to cultivate during the season, getting one-on-one time with coaches, stopping by every serve and pass every time I'm on site for a match. And it's huge because they respect me because I played the sport and now I'm talking about it and I really understand. But yeah, I mean, having played in the Big Ten, especially at Northwestern, I got a really good taste of the highest possible level of volleyball at the collegiate level. And it really helped me understand the game better. And, I thought we had an incredible coaching staff. That one of our assistants was the former assistant coach on the USA women's national team, Aaron Virtue, who's now the head coach at Michigan. We had Kevin Moore for my 4 years, who was kind of our scout coach. And he just had such a deep understanding of the game and what to look for and how to scout. And then our head coach, Shane Davis, who's just one of my favorite people on the planet, just such a high volleyball IQ mind, and is now the head coach of the men's team at Loyola. So, I felt like we were really set up to understand the game at a high level. It also helps when you're going to Northwestern. And I think the coaches understand that the players are also just like a little bit smarter than maybe you would get elsewhere. So they felt like they could dive in a little bit more and throw a lot at us. But I just felt like I constantly absorbed that even when I wasn't on the court. For my first 3 years, I rarely ever got playing time. I was that person when we were up like 22-10 and they would throw me in just because, and like I was happy with that. But also what that did was I was constantly watching from the bench. So I was watching plays unfold. I felt like I had to know the scout better than anyone on the court. So when they came off, I could tell them what I'm seeing, what shots are available, where they should be, what maybe something that they're not seeing that I can see. So in a way, it kind of helped me to really deeply understand the game that I obviously use now, every single day in my job.
So me personally, in terms of volleyball, going and covering volleyball sort of at a local high school level, and we got a local team who's won 3 straight back-to-back state championships.
Okay.
And in the area where I am in, it just seems like volleyball is huge. Packed stands, the crowd goes wild. And I'll be honest, I don't religiously watch volleyball. I'm a big sports guy, but tuning in to this D1 tournament, I'm not sure if it translates to the regular season, but that's even more competitive in a way. And it just looks incredible watching it.
Yeah.
You can tell the crowd's just incredible. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of fun.
Oh, I mean, the reason volleyball is so much fun to watch is because it is so fast paced and there's not a lot of breaks. So when you're watching a football game, you get like 5 seconds of action followed by 30 seconds of inaction. In volleyball, you get anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute of action followed by only 10 minutes of inaction. So there's so much happening at one time. It's a really difficult sport to turn away from. So if you're just scrolling through the channels, you throw on a volleyball match, you're constantly in awe of these athletes, of how high they jump, how athletic they are, how hard they hit the ball, how powerful yet graceful they look. And I think it's really impressive when you're turning on a game for the first time and it's really difficult to turn away from because of all of those factors and you're instantly captivated by it. And, it's no secret that this sport is absolutely exploding. Every single year we've seen record viewership on every network. We're seeing more attendance records broken than ever before. Last season, Nebraska packed 92,000 people into a football stadium to watch, which set a women's sporting attendance world record. So the most fans to ever attend a sporting event on a women's side in history. So this sport is exploding, and there's obviously, reasons why. It's not just happenstance that it's happening. I of course really love the sport and I played it, but it's been really fun over the last few years, I would say, as the sports gain traction, to bring in those casual viewers, because just like you're mentioning and what we're finding is that casual sports fans just really like to watch it because it's so fun.
So from your side of things, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been in the broadcast booth before, just not on the sidelines. I know you probably have listened to football broadcasters, baseball broadcasters, but with nonstop action in a broadcast booth covering volleyball, I'm curious what that is like.
Really good question. I've been told before that volleyball is one of the toughest sports to call because there's constantly something happening. So for me, for example, as an analyst, I have approximately 10 to 15 seconds to get in whatever I want to get in, and then I got to get out before the next first serve. So there's so much happening right there. I'm obviously watching the play. I'm asking for whatever replay I want to my producer. Then I'm talking about it, and you're trying to weave in and listen to your play-by-play to go off of them and try to make it a cohesive broadcast, while also watching, what's happening on the court. Is someone subbing in? What rotations are they lining up in? There's so much to think about in such a short amount of time that as an analyst, I don't really have time to kind of think about what I'm going to say. I think a lot of people think that, for broadcasters, they kind of plan out what they're going to say. And not that it's scripted, but I think if people don't really know anything about it, they might think that. This sport is way too fast to be even at all scripted. The only part that I would say is somewhat scripted, or I actually think about what I'm going to say, is the 30 seconds that we have while we're opening a show and we're on camera. That's the only time where I know like pretty much exactly what I want to say. Other than that, it's like whatever pops in my head, I'm going to make it, try to make it sound eloquent. And it's very hectic in the booth. And, sometimes we're right down on the court side. Sometimes we're up in a booth. So, you got to deal with like balls flying everywhere. You got to keep your head on a swivel, fans coming up, being crazy. It's so much fun though, because, I usually arrive to a match about 2 hours before it starts, and kind of get my bearings for the first hour before everything's just absolutely hectic. But that's what keeps it fun. Like, for me, I feel like on game day, it feels the same as when I was playing. Like I'm gearing up to play. I'm kind of warming up my voice a little bit. I'm having some banter with my play-by-play. And then we get things going. And from then on, it doesn't stop until, a few minutes after the game ends.
So, Emily, we all know you've been doing a lot of volleyball coverage, and I took a look at your X account on Twitter, and you've traveled 18,894 miles in 39 matches in 2024. Out of all those miles in all those matches, what really excited you? What stood out to you the most in 2024 in terms of your volleyball coverage?
Good question. And I think the funny part about it too is like that was just the fall for me. That's from basically September to December. And I, world traveled throughout the summer too, which I thought about including in that mileage, but it was going to be way too high. I when I think about the college season, I think about the way it started and the way it ended, because they started and ended pretty similar to me. I was at one of the first weekend, the college showcase for Fox up in Milwaukee. And right away we had Minnesota, who was, I think, ranked like 20th at the time, took down number 1 Texas. And that was a crazy upset that we had in our first match of the season, which I could not believe. That was the first, one of the first matches I called. And then we go all the way to the end of the season and we have Penn State winning it all, which I don't think anybody anticipated, for that team to go that far and to have, some teams kind of melt down when the pressure came on. So I just thought this season was so much fun because there was so much parity that we saw, despite 4 number 1 seeds getting into the finals for the first time in about 10 years. Like besides all of that, there actually was so much parity. There were so many upsets. We saw dominance from teams, but we saw some really crazy things happen that I don't feel like we had seen in the sport in a long time. So that was really, really fun. Just that full circle moment of like, okay, the year started off crazy and it also ended that way.
So I saw you also covered, like you mentioned, that outdoor volleyball match as well. Volleyball outdoors in the elements. How does that sort of play out? Because you have the wind, and I'm not sure how a volleyball reacts to outdoor conditions, but what was that experience like in the gameplay playing a match outside?
I mean, whenever I think back to that match, I like get emotional because of just how incredible it was. So it was August 30th of 2023, so about a year and a half ago. And I mean, the preparation for that also, like back it up, started basically 8, 9 months before then. The head coach, John Cook, the head coach for Nebraska, had an idea and he wanted to continue to try to break these records. He's very competitive in that way. Wisconsin had retook the indoor record. And so they wanted to have the record for themselves because it's the volleyball mecca of the world, essentially. That's really the only place where you can pack 92,000 people in a football stadium to watch a volleyball match. But the prep started way in advance. And I remember just stepping foot on the court for the first time a day before the match happened. And I was just in awe. Like, one, Memorial Stadium in Nebraska is super cool. Like the history that they have for their football program was awesome. And to see them put volleyball on that kind of platform just meant a lot to me, meant a lot to everyone, obviously from Nebraska, but just volleyball fans in general. It was so cool. And then on match day, I remember during the national anthem, there was a flyover, the girls are running out of the tunnel. I was just sobbing. Like, I couldn't believe that this was happening. And at that point we were like 1 minute to air. Like, I remember my producer hitting my ear and saying, "Hey, 60 seconds. I've got mascara running down my face. I'm freaking out. I'm like, this is so emotional. I got to get myself together." But it was so much fun. Like, I was so honored to not only be there, but to be able to call that match in such a historic time, not just in volleyball, but really women's sports. And it was really cool to be a part of. And in terms of the elements, like the thing about the match was it really wasn't about the volleyball. We had Nebraska, who has won 5 national titles, going up against Nebraska Omaha, who, is barely a Division I program, and we knew it was going to be a blowout. So it wasn't really necessarily about the game. So, from that point, it was like, okay, let's shift our focus from this event and let's call the match. But it was a lot of back and forth. We had just a lot of discussions about the growth of the sport and what it means, and, a lot of crowd shots and things like that, where the match itself was more about the event rather than, the actual volleyball game. But I will say, I really did think both Nebraska and Omaha did a really good job calming their nerves. Like, right away, I think we expected like every ball to get hit out of bounds, every serve to go out of bounds, just because of like how amped up the girls would be. But somehow they just kept it all in and seemed totally fine from the outside.
So you mentioned how the season in 2024 started with craziness, ended with craziness. And I think from what I've translated from this whole tournament, it was pretty crazy as well. And again, I don't watch volleyball a lot, but tuning into some of these matches, it just seems like March Madness, but in the fall for volleyball.
Yeah. It was so much fun. I mean, it's been really cool to see. I think, when we talk about like women's basketball or even volleyball, when you get into the tournament, a lot of times you don't really see those early round upsets just because it really is, top heavy a lot of times in women's sports. Like, you don't necessarily have those dark horses a lot of time that can make a run. This year was completely different. Like, we saw so many upsets early on, I think more than we've ever seen before. And yes, we ended up with 4 number 1 seeds for the first time, in about 10 years. So like, you might not think there's parity there, But for those teams to get there, it was absolutely insane. I mean, we saw multiple times, like, for example, Louisville was down 14-11 in a fifth set against UNI, who was an 8 seed. They shouldn't have been there. And, they fended off 3 match points. They have a crazy 22-20 fifth set. And Louisville ends up going all the way to the national championship match. So there were so many times where, yes, there were 4 number 1 seeds to make the Final Four. But for those teams to get there, it was not easy at all. And it was just so much fun. I think for me, this was the most fun tournament, especially the most fun Final Four that we have ever seen. Those 2 Final Four matchups, I still think about. Like, I cannot believe what happened in both of those, with Penn State moving on, defeating Nebraska, and Louisville moving on, defeating Pitt, who had been to 3 straight Final Fours and was the clear favorite to win the tournament. It was so much fun. It was so exciting to see. And for me to have a front row seat to all of that was just like the biggest blessing ever.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Final Four match. I wanted to touch on the Penn State one, a reverse sweep. And again, my volleyball lingo, not the best, but a reverse sweep. What is that, and how huge was that to see that in person?
It is. I can't explain how difficult it is to get a reverse sweep. So that means that the other team won the first 2 sets, and then your team, so Penn State, ended up winning the next 3. So Penn State was down 0-2 in the match. They fended off multiple set points, and they found a way to grind it out. I mean, it was one of the best matches that we had really ever seen, but especially in a tournament like that. They needed a change, and they had a few players that just absolutely went off. And I thought it was so fun to see the grit from that team. They took the big swings when it mattered. Going down 0-2 in any setting is really difficult, but doing it in this sport is even more difficult, especially in a Final Four, especially against your in-conference rival, a team that is expected to win. And it was just so impressive for this Penn State team, especially with all they had been going through. Their head coach had been diagnosed with cancer a few months prior. So for them to just kind of channel that fight that they had seen from her all year into that match, I think we were all just absolutely blown away.
Yeah, and again, going to the national championship, you mentioned Penn State and their storyline, their head coach's storyline. They get it done. And your front row providing coverage for ESPN. Just how huge was that to be on that stage, the national championship, covering it right there?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a dream of mine. I think since I started in college, started calling college volleyball matches, I wanted to be a part of the national championship and whatever that looked like. And it was a big goal last year to just call tournament matches. And I was blessed enough to call a regional, so the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 matches. I was asked again to cover a regional this year. So you're basically one of 4 crews that's covering those matches. And then when I was told that I was covering the Final Four and championship, I literally started crying. I was so excited. I mean, to have a front row seat to something and a voice for these players, these coaches, these teams and programs that you've been following all year, and to culminate it into something as exciting as that. And to be the voice behind that was so much fun. So I did our studio coverage. I was a studio analyst alongside Christine Williamson for ESPN. And it was so cool. I mean, to be able to just go up there and, again, just literally talk about volleyball, like I would be doing anyway, but to get paid for it was so cool. And honestly, it just helped so much that we had the most insane matches to cover. It made my job incredibly easy and incredibly fun.
So, well, I obviously just sort of rewinding in terms of this whole tournament, is the selection process sort of the same in terms of what it's like for basketball, or is that kind of different?
So it's a little bit different, and they've been toying with it over the last few years. So the way that basketball does it is they seed out 1 to 64, and you're kind of automatically placed in those spots based on your seeding. The way that volleyball does it is they seed out 1 to 16, and those seeds are automatically placed. From there, you have 17 to 32. So the other kind of quarter of that, they're grouped for 5 seeds, 6 seeds, 7 seeds, and 8 seeds. So you only have half of the field actually seeded. 1 through 16 is placed, and then 17 through 32, they're grouped, and they are based on those groups, like if you're a 5, 6, 7, 8 seed, you go based on where you are, but it's also a little bit regional. So a team, that's in like Southern California is not going to fly out to Pitt to play out there. So it is a little bit more regional based for those teams. And then once you get into 33 through 64, those teams are based more regionally. So it is different than basketball. And, they've been trying to get it to a place where they would just completely seed out, which I hope that they do in the future, because it would make things just a little bit more fair in terms of seeding. But I will say, like, they did an awesome job with it this year. I had pretty much no notes on the way that they seeded. And I think they're kind of doing the best they can under the parameters that have been set.
And it just seems like how crazy, how fun, and how exciting this whole tournament is. The state of college volleyball and volleyball in general is only trending upwards and upwards. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely exploding. I mean, there's record viewership for ESPN every single year. I think it was up 30% from last year, which is absolutely insane. The Final Four matchups, or the regional matchups, so Sweet 16 and Elite 8, were up 100% from the year before. So the viewership literally doubled from the previous year. And those numbers are very, very hard to get. You hope for like small incremental changes, like 10% would be really cool. The fact that viewership is skyrocketing this much for every network across the board has been so exciting. We're also seeing a really big investment from these networks. For example, the national championship was on ABC for the first time in 2023. And that was so fun to see it on that platform. Also in 2023, Fox had the first ever college volleyball match on just one of the big four. So, Fox, CBS, ABC, or whatever, the NBC. And it was the first time that had happened. So it's been really cool to see the growth of the sport and the investment from these networks. And for the first time this year, we had another match on ABC. We had more matches on Fox. There were 4 of them, and the national championship on ABC. So we're seeing like so much investment from these networks because they're seeing the viewership. And it's at a point where, these networks and the executives and departments, like, they can't turn away from the viewership that's been given. And it's been really cool to see just those resources poured into the sport too.
Absolutely. So with the conclusion of the tournament, you mentioned you got a little break, but back to work you go with Indy Ignite. And you mentioned you're doing international volleyball coming up too.
Yeah. So basically kind of what I do in the summer, which is like the coolest gig ever. There's a tournament called Volleyball Nations League, or VNL. And essentially what it is the top 16 national teams. So basically the teams that you would see in the Olympics, the top 16 compete in a tournament over an 8-week period. So there's 3 weeks of prelims and there's 1 week of finals. And I basically go around and follow wherever Team USA goes, and I get to call international professional volleyball. So last year I went to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I went to Hong Kong. I was in Bangkok, Thailand. I basically just get to travel the world and call volleyball. And it's the most insane job. Like, we get there usually 2 days before, so we get settled into the time change and all of that. And then I will say, like, it's a grind, last year, it was a 6-week period and I called 50 matches during that time. So we're grinding while we're there. But it is really fun because you get to explore all these cities. And I made sure that last summer, I was able to kind of get out either in the morning or, the day before matches started, and get to explore these cities and try to find some downtime. And I was luckily able to do that at every spot. And it was just the coolest thing I could ever be a part of. And headed into this summer, I'm really excited to do it again.
And in terms of the competition, traveling the world, what's the competition like out there?
I mean, it's the best of the best. Like, all of the teams that you watched in the Olympics last fall are competing in it. It's the same players, same coaches, same team. So it is literally the highest possible level of volleyball that you can get.
Absolutely. Emily, great work out there on those networks. Keep on doing what you do. Before we let you go, let our viewers know where they can find you.
Yeah, all over social. So Instagram, Twitter, whatever you got, at Emily Ehman, EMILYEHMAN. And yeah, that's where I'm at. And then this winter, you can watch me on for Indy Ignite. If you're not local to Indy, you can watch on YouTube. And then this summer on Volleyball World. So yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Emily. I'm hoping more volleyball covers to come. Hopefully we'll get you back on again soon.
Yeah, thank you.